Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cloud Wars Live. We're exploring the digital revolution and all of its ramifications these days, particularly in the red-hot area of industry clouds. We're delighted to have today two top executives from Infor to hear about what Infor is doing in this dynamic space. We've got CEO Kevin Samuelson and CTO and President of Products, Somasundaram. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us here.
Great. Thanks for having us, Bob. We're really excited.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Kevin, Soma, tell us a little bit about, I know Infor has been around for quite a while. You've got a strong presence in the industry cloud. Give me your view, please, if you would, about what you think of this. It seems like it's a fairly new uptick in very, very strong demand for this sort of solutions that you're offering.
Yeah, maybe I'll start and Soma certainly pile in. We are certainly seeing a ton of demand. Soma and I have been with the company actually since it started way back in 2002. And when we started the company, we had a view, as you probably know, I wouldn't say ERP companies or enterprise software companies are particularly loved out in the broad market. There are reputations for long implementations that can cost tens or hundreds of millions. A lot of times ROI isn't there. So the thesis that we had when we started the company was, if the software itself and the people around it really went deeply into industry, that would reduce the need for long implementations, lots of customizations, and make for a much quicker and better experience to go live and ultimately to value. We also had a view that integrations caused all sorts of issues for customers, not just in implementation, but on an ongoing basis. And so what could we do to facilitate easier combinations with our software as well as others? And well, it took us a long time to build the company. We did lots of acquisitions. As we're sitting here today, it does feel like companies want a return on their investment a lot more quickly. They're facing much more material business issues and disruption. And in that environment, the ability to get to value quickly, the ability to bring industry best practices, both in our software as well as our people, it seems to really, really resonate. And so we're having a lot of momentum and good luck, and so far it's paid off.
Great. And Soma, please, how about your perspectives too? Because as Kevin said, I know both of you have been, with Infor for a number of years and have seen a whole lot of changes over those 20 years or so.
Yeah, just to kind of add to what Kevin said, so if you really think about industry specificity, right? If you want to go after a select set of industries with what we call last mile capabilities, right? That means last mile functionality, last mile content. And to be able to do that, fundamentally, the solutions have to be architected in a way that it only addresses, adjacent set of industries, right? You cannot be solving a problem in aerospace and defense, and the next day you're solving the same code base, solving a problem in a dairy company, because they're very different, right? So our whole strategy was, let's build pillars. We don't call them ERP anymore, cloud suites. A suite that's got a hub, which only serves adjacent industries that have commonality, and we have four different hubs that really drive what we are trying to go into last mile functionality. So that is a unique approach in the market. No one else, to our knowledge, is doing that. It does create extra burden on us as a provider to really carry these engines and build functionality in there, but it seems to actually be much more effective than having 90,000 switches you have to tweak to get anything to work for any particular industry.
Yeah. So and Kevin, after that, that perspective that you've offered there, it's interesting. We've started a new newsletter called, it's not a very exciting name, but it says what it is, Industry Cloud Newsletter, to try to focus on some of these new developments. And the issue that came out yesterday, the theme of that issue was, the end of traditional ERP. So both Kevin, from what you said about, in many ways, the customer's sentiment toward ERP, and Soma, how you described it, you don't use the term, it's cloud suites. It seems like these industry suites or industry solutions have the potential to put ERP maybe in a place where it still does some good things, but you get more of that industry specificity on top, that becomes sort of the brain trust for corporations moving forward. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, we're biased, but we certainly agree with that perspective. Again, if you get to the heart of what companies are looking for, they're not looking for ERP. They're looking to make their business grow more quickly, become more profitable, and ultimately that comes down to processes and data. And those do happen to be extremely industry specific, whether it's supply chains or how the shop floor works or interactions with customers. There's a lot of similarities once you get into an industry. So someone mentioned dairy. Think about how unique that industry is, the supply chain, how they have to store, weigh, sell materials. Having to figure that out with every implementation over and over again is extremely inefficient. And again, they don't think in ERP, they think we've got a process. We need to not just do the accounting, but we need to manage the shop floor and the supply chain and all the pieces in between. And we want to figure that out, not have to piece all this together on our own. And so if you think about where that goes in the future, and you're really solving business problems, it does create probably a different outcome over time.
Yeah, Kevin, I have yet to meet a CEO who walks around thinking, gee, I really have to think about enterprise resource planning today. It's not that function isn't important, but there's no context to it. And it was a terrific tool, for a number of years for a certain set of needs. But I think the way, that modern digital business is happening in this customer or consumer driven economy, there's got to be so much more capability deep inside the various industry segments, or else, as Soma pointed out, you could have an aerospace or defense company using the same software as a dating company. It just doesn't make sense in 2021.
Yeah, and maybe to take one step further, and Soma, do you want to go?
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I'll take one step forward, but certainly Soma pile on. I think the alternatives in the market, if you think about it today, either you go with a single multi-tenant platform that is the same platform for every industry, and in which case you really don't have the capability of going deeply into industry and solving those problems. Or you take either a hosted or on-premise solution, and again, it's the same solution across all industries, and you've got to do massive amounts of customizations to make it work, which again, you're back to that old paradigm of huge cost, low ROI, rigid systems moving forward. And so, with those alternatives, that's where we feel like we can be quite different. To Soma's point, we don't have one product that we're trying to solve everything with. We have 4 platforms, each serves a very select number of industries, and we're not trying to go after everything. And by going deeply into industry with products, at least our perspective is that helps get at the future that you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, just to add, a couple of more angles to this, right? One of the things is that, like you described, Bob, the notion of ERP was served its purpose in the last 20 years. That was fine. But if today in the digital world, people want to consume the business service in a fashion that may not necessarily be through the user experience, right? So through the screen, right? If I have automation in my plant, in my factory, robots are communicating with the system in that scenario. If I have Alexa for business at my desk, I'm communicating with Alexa to get information from the ERP system, right? So in that scenario, we actually had the opportunity to build this literally from scratch. We spent $5 billion to build these solutions. Obviously, we stole our own design ideas from the acquisitions we had from before. But these solutions were built industry specific, built with a high degree of API centricity and high degree of data in centricity. So if you have a data rich architecture and I have API rich architecture, then these services can be consumed in a fashion that you couldn't do in the traditional application, right? So it's both the industry specific as well as modern technology that we feel is what needs to be there to drive digital transformation.
Yeah. So, Kevin, can I ask too, it's interesting now, because on the one hand, you want to have that, as you both described, this very deep, rich industry specific capability. And on the other hand, we see a lot of businesses today that are finding that I'll keep one foot maybe in this industry that hasn't changed much in 100 or 150, 200 years, but industry boundaries are dissolving a little bit, and I need to be able to move sideways and sort of follow the money, follow the opportunities. How do you address that?
Well, normally when we see situations like you describe, companies aren't going in radically different directions. They're normally going into adjacencies. And the reason they choose those adjacencies is because they leverage what those companies tend to be good at. So when that's the case, we tend to do fine. If a company is going and doing something wildly different, or they're massive conglomerates in all sorts of different industries, then we're probably not the right solution. And again, that's okay for us. We're not trying to solve everything for everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Along the way, Kevin, are you finding, any big enterprise software company like Infor has to have, a long history of relationships with a CIO or a CTO? Could you talk about some of the emerging, evolving, or deepening relationships that you have with now? Is it the CEO, the CFO, CMO?
Yeah, what I would say is, if you look, and really with COVID and things accelerating the way they have, it feels like it was a CIO was the primary relationship for a very long time. It feels now like it's a CIO, CFO a conversation, and more the CEO is getting more into the details. And again, I think that's because it is transitioning from how do we replace a system or a technology to how do we actually solve a business problem or address something that's strategic. And that changes both how you sell, how you install, but it also changes that relationship because it becomes much more of a strategic partner than a vendor. Yeah.
Yeah. And Soma, if I could ask, probably a lot of the companies you're doing business with, if they say to you, well, I have these old incumbent systems in here, can you work with me on top of those?
That's a great question. So one of the things that the ERP providers have done is that what I would call a vertical stack, meaning you go completely with that vendor top to bottom, right? That has been the approach. You own you run on my infrastructure, my cloud, my app. And that kind of monolithic architecture doesn't lend itself for the next, the next wave of digital innovation that's happening in the market, right?
It's a great point. If I could just cut in here for a second, I want to offer a word from our sponsor, BMC. BMC wants to know, is your business on its A game? That's when systems are intelligent by learning from markets, where automation is paramount yet effortless, and when technology and people work as one in an enterprise. The A game is your business at its absolute best. BMC calls this the autonomous digital enterprise. Find out more at bmc.com/A-game.
So what we also realize, though, is that as we go into one of a prospective customer, by going and saying that you have to completely rip and replace your systems to go with what we have, that is not realistic. So we actually architected these solutions, like I said earlier, in a very componentized fashion with coexistence in mind, right? So we can coexist with whoever the incumbent vendor is and provide extended value by integrating into that system. So openness in terms of embracing customers' ecosystem is actually at the core of what we are trying to do in our delivery.
Right. Soma, can I ask too, when you're talking to some of these companies, they clearly are looking for some additional capabilities, additional expertise and help. How do they frame with you the priorities that the business challenge priorities that they're facing?
Yeah, it depends on the industry and the state at which that particular organization is in. So sometimes the capabilities that the customer requires may be in what I would call a strategic edge application that may be outside the boundary of an ERP, right? Like, for example, asset management. If I'm in an asset intensive environment, I want to be able to manage my assets, whether it's factory floor, the machines that are there, the robots that are making the operations run. You want to be able to maintain that, and they may be having a strong need to make sure that their throughput can be can be supported by highest level of uptime with these machines, right? So that is maybe what I would call starting from the edge, not replacing the core, but you deploy that. That could be a priority for them. In some cases where it is labor intensive, where they want to be able to manage their talent really well. So they may be starting with our HCM solution as a starting point. So it depends on what the company is looking for in terms of their transformational need, and that creates the priorities for them, and we can work with them. Like I said earlier, we can start anywhere and grow from there.
Yeah. So Kevin, can I ask you here on that? Right, there's nobody needs to tell you gentlemen that it's a very, very competitive world out there. And if somebody, a prospective customer, says, I like what you have going on here, but you know, does Infor have sort of the capability to continue to invest, you know, if not at the levels that Soma described of 5 billion to build this, but on an ongoing basis, can you keep up with some of these much larger companies?
Yeah, and you know, there was a time when that was more of a struggle. But as you may know, we're private and extraordinarily well funded, and that's actually given us an advantage on that front. You know, obviously, a lot of companies say we're long-term focused. We're your partner for the long term, but we got to make this number this quarter, so we need to get done with X and Y and Z. We have a very, very different approach. We are truly thinking in decades, and that's the way our owners think. And so when we talk with customers on that front, there's a lot of certainty around direction, and then that shows up in how we deal with them as well. So to Soma's point, if we show up and they want to use Salesforce and they don't want our CRM, that's great. We'll partner because we're thinking about this over 10 years, not what can we do this quarter. If there's elements that they want to add to the product and put it in our core because they're in our industry and they want to partner that way, we'll often do that if it benefits a lot of customers. And so if you think in those longer term time cycles, certainty around direction becomes much less of an issue because they truly feel like they're with someone who's not looking to maximize this quarter's outcome.
Yeah.
There's one more thing, Bob, I want to add here, which is actually a important angle. And that is earlier when I was saying that, you know, we're vertical stack where you are the best at building the infrastructure, building the cloud infrastructure on top of that, cloud services, the app on top of that, including the database that the solution utilizes, right? That was actually beneficial in the previous world. So our view is that if you embrace industry innovation, you actually can outspend any one vendor's R&D budget. So if you think about, we run on AWS, we leverage probably more services on AWS than any other application that is deployed on that, including probably Netflix. So we use a lot of their services. So if you add AWS's R&D, which actually is Amazon spends over 40 billion in R&D, we're riding on top of that, right? And we also embrace open source heavily, Apache Foundation. We use components that millions of developers are contributing. Why not leverage that? By doing that, we actually are spending way more than any other larger provider on the market.
So is there a challenge to sort of putting all your chips on one infrastructure provider?
Well, it has not been a challenge for the most part, right? There are certain segments of the market have preference of one over the other. But when we started this journey 8 years ago, AWS was a leader. They are still a leader. So rather than reinventing and trying to be, all things to all people, like Kevin said, that's not our goal. So we wanted to really optimize what we are doing on a hyperscaler who's also innovating at lightning speed. So it worked really well. Will we have portability and have these applications available on other hyperscalers? Absolutely, as time goes on. But we wanted to get really good at doing this at one hyperscaler before we go out to be more portable.
Okay. And Kevin, I liked how you described the conversations now are sort of paired up CIO, CFO with the CEO being involved there more. I wondered, are you seeing in some ways, right, like CIOs for a long time, maybe in the traditional way of running IT, they had a certain function. You often hear them say things like, my job is to support the business, but isn't in today's world, IT is part of the business. It's an essential part of the business. So do you see the sort of the culture between the technology department inside a big company and sort of the more traditional part of the business? Is that gap closing?
Without a doubt. And I think that's a function of both where business is going, but also technology. When you remove all of that infrastructure from a CIO's role, and again, any within software, all the customizations and integrations, you start to remove all of that, they're pushed into really thinking more strategically, being part of the business, which frankly, most CIOs much prefer that anyway. And so I think this is frankly kind of a win for everyone, but there's no question that's the way that things are going today, is they're becoming a more strategic part of an organization.
Okay. And so, gentlemen, I also saw, on your site, it says that Infor's got 67,000 customers across about 178 countries. And of those, I think 14,000 are cloud customers. Could you talk about your cloud business and offer any details about the growth rates of any kind?
Yeah. What I'll tell you is we're of our $3.5 billion, it's about $1 billion of run rate for us. And it's grown, in about 4 or 5 years, we've been able to build that. So it's grown at quite a rapid rate. And it's pretty interesting. If you look at the composition of that, one of the things is we've gone deeply into industry with our multi-tenant cloud products. We've kept our existing on-premise customers in mind and given them a really nice pathway to move to the cloud that is a lot simpler than alternatives. So about 1/3 of what we have moved to the cloud has been our existing customers on-premise systems moving, which, and that's growing quite a bit. About 1/3 is net new. And then about 1/3 is, again, we have, as Soma mentioned, suites. It's not just, hey, here's ERP, but in your industry, warehouse management and supply chain and asset management might be important. So we continue to expand that suite and cross-sell. So it's a nice cross-section of building new business, upgrading customers, and continuing to expand relationships.
Okay. So Kevin, you mentioned 4 or 5 years there. So the $1 billion annualized run rate, are you saying that that's really been built up over these last 4 or 5 years? Is that right?
Yeah. So you remember exactly what year did we really begin selling the existing cloud products?
2017.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, it's an interesting detail there because I just believe that, that for this year and next year, this notion of industry-specific clouds, industry-specific capabilities and solutions with the infusion of the incredible things now that AI can do, that ML can do, that it's just going to be one of the hottest, maybe most interesting parts of the entire cloud market is what you folks are doing here with these industry-specific capabilities and solutions.
We agree. I do think, though, it's really hard. It is a bit of a messier business to go deeply into industry. Again, processes are extremely complex and unique. It is not just having software, but having teams that really understand these industries. So I think there is a vast difference between having a branded industry approach versus showing up with products that are really purpose-built and a deep understanding of the uniquenesses of each industry, because they are, when you get into the details, very, very different.
Yeah. Yeah. And Soma, I wonder if I could ask you, both you and Kevin have alluded to the 4 platforms that Infor offers. Could you tell us about that and, why that drives a certain level of value for customers?
Yeah. I mean, so if you think about manufacturing, right? So we are manufacturing and distribution. That's a big market segment we serve. Inside manufacturing, you have discrete manufacturing, meaning aerospace and defense, high tech, automotive, and industrial manufacturing, where you are making things that are discrete in nature, right? So you generally need strong capability in multiple levels of bill of material. You need project-based delivery. You need to be able to do milestone billing. The capabilities you need in discrete manufacturing is there in one of our platforms that powers those suites. So the Cloud Suite, Aerospace and Defense, Cloud Suite, Automotive, and so on, that's powered by that suite. Contrast that to a process manufacturing suite, which serves food and beverage, fashion, specialty chemicals. If you look at those, they all have one thing in common, and that is you deal with attribute-based SKUs, right? In fashion, you have size, fit, color. In dairy, you have butterfat content, right? In chemicals, you have potency. So if you align industries where have that level of commonality, we can build deep functionality for those industries, because you don't if you're a soup processor, every tomato that you get doesn't have the same amount of moisture, right? You got to understand that there's variability. So we took an engine, a core engine, I hate to call it ERP, that powers those process industries, right? And then we have one which powers service industries, which is primarily healthcare, public sector, and financial services, where there is no manufacturing, there is no order taking. It's much more catering to procure to pay. That process is very different than manufacturing industries, and financial requirements are quite different. In a hospital, you want to know how much are you spending by procedure, by physician, by patient. That's quite different than manufacturing industry. So we have an engine that drives just the service industries, and then we have a fourth one which is more for the SMB business, right? So you're $100 million or less. I mean, we power that with that engine. So those are the four platforms that we go to market with that allows us to actually be much more agile, so we can drive more functionality into specific industries faster.
Okay.
And the other big advantage, Bob, that really resonates with customers and gets back to your earlier question of, are we investing enough? One of the other elements of our business that's different is if you buy one of our products in one of these industries, you also know that all the R&D dollars are helping you.
Right.
So when you're buying a platform that serves every industry within GDP, only a fraction of the R&D benefits your business. But with us, it's actually every dollar.
Yeah, very important point, actually. Yeah.
With the more precise, almost localized transaction there, right? It's going into this thing, will be plowed back into that as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Kevin, Soma, are there, if anybody's hesitant in some ways about making this move with you, and you talked about the movement of a number of your on-premises customers into the cloud, what's the concern these days, right? Is it around regulatory issues or data sovereignty, or is it something else?
Well, I think with Infor specifically, where we have the biggest challenge, frankly, is brand. We spend a lot of time acquiring companies. And then to Soma's point, we spent roughly $5 billion rewriting these multi-tenant systems, which meant, frankly, we were probably inwardly focused for a long time. And it's only in the last few years that we've really had all the ingredients, the products, the market, the technology. And so we've pushed it hard. But back to your question of kind of who from the C-level is involved, oftentimes when you get to boards or way up in an organization and they are entrusting us with the most critical elements of their operation for hopefully decades, it's not a solvency question, but it's like Infor, I don't know those guys. So that has been a headwind for us. But beyond that, I think what most companies are reticent about is the risk of ERP that's existed in history. That I think I'm signing up for a 1-year project that's going to cost X and it ends up being a 5-year project that costs 10X. And I think we bring a different approach to that, but I think that's still where companies are worried about just the risk of entering these types of projects.
Okay. And guys, do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
What about, we hear a lot these days about, partner ecosystems. Could you tell us, talk a little bit about the importance of that today, and how is it different from, say, Kevin, to use your timeline before you started to roll out the cloud products 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, here is another area that we're quite different than the alternatives in the market. And I think, again, this is largely because we're private and can think in long time horizons, and we're not optimizing for a public investor or a private equity investor. We have a $800 million services business as well. So when a customer wants to partner with a Deloitte or an Accenture or a typical SI, that's great. We absolutely work with them, but we'll have our services teams there as well to make sure that there's one throat to choke, and we're clearly part of this and are answerable to any issues. We're also happy to own a lot of the implementations if that's preferable to a customer. I can do that in advantaged ways. And then we have quite a large partner network for companies less than 100 million or so in revenue. But again, we're happy to kind of partner on that front as well. So I would say we're quite open and work with partners a lot, but also have other alternatives and mixes and options that customers tend to like.
Okay. And guys, before we go here, is there anything in particular that either of you would like to add?
Soma?
No, I think we covered what we needed to cover, but I would say that it's about industry specificity. It's about industry last mile in both feature and content. When I say content, the thousands of customers who are deploying these solutions in the cloud, we have access to this data that we can turn into insights and drive back, productivity for our users. As well as using the data, we can actually embed AI, which we didn't talk too much about. But our idea here is, standalone AI projects have been there, they've been tried, they are useful in some use cases. But our idea is, if we are industry specific, why can't we have industry specific AI embedded into our solution for automation, for optimization, for advisory functions, right? So we believe we have some unique advantage here because of this industry specificity in all of these different angles, and that hopefully we will be able to deliver more and more value as time goes on, and customers can leverage this beyond ways that they ever imagined in traditional applications.
Okay. Kevin, anything from you?
No, we're thrilled that you're diving deeply into industry specific solutions. I mean, we're biased, but we certainly think that's absolutely where the future is. And the more we're all innovating in that direction, I think ultimately our end customers will benefit.
Yeah, I think, we've heard from a couple of companies recently, right? Now, a public presentation, you've probably seen such, and Nadella said that Microsoft's now industry first. The head of the industry clouds at Salesforce recently said, same with us, we're industry first. So we see companies from IBM and others moving in this direction. I just think it's wonderful for customers, and then the competition that arises within that, and the incredible investments and capabilities that companies like Infor and the others are making here. It's just going to provide a very, very bountiful buyer's market, it seems. So just expect incredible growth of this over the next few years.
We completely agree with you, and hopefully we're participants in that.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds great. Kevin, Soma, thank you so much for the time here. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Very good, and thanks to all of you folks for being with us here at Cloud Wars Live. Hope you've enjoyed this conversation with the leaders at Infor, and we will be back soon with lots more coverage of what's going on in this red hot area of the industry cloud. Thanks for being with us.